Hey everybody, welcome back. I am your host, Rachel. Thank you for tuning in again. Today's episode, I am going to be focused on a little bit of family dynamics, family systems, and addiction. So stay tuned. I'll be back. Go anywhere. Welcome back. Again, I'm Rachel, and I will be talking more about family dynamics today and the role that that has to do with families that have someone with addiction or people with addiction. Because a lot of the times, like we talked about, it can be more than one person in the family that this is happening to. Um, and last time I know that I was talking to you guys about guilt and shame, and I kind of touch upon the family dynamics piece of it. So I wanted to look at this a little further today. Again, I'm not going to go like super deep into it because once I go into next season where I'm talking more about the mental health, addiction is part of mental health, but once I move into some other topics off of the addiction piece, I'm going to be talking about the family dynamics a little bit more in depth. So I'm just going to touch upon this briefly in this episode. So, what do I mean by addiction is a family disease? What does that even mean? I think when people hear that, they assume or they get defensive because they think that, you know, that this means that it's their fault or that they played, they're the reason for the person's addiction or something like that. No, that is not what this means. Um, but really, rather, again, I'm just looking at my little notebook here. I'm not, you know, doodling or something. But what I'm referring to is not like to blame the family. I'm not talking about the genetics piece of it. Um, so what do I mean by addiction as a family disease? Now, usually when people hear this, they tend to kind of think that it's trying to place blame on the family. That is not what that is. Addiction is called a family disease because it impacts everybody. The person with the addiction is impacted, and in turn, that is impacting the family system. So that is what they mean by addiction as a family disease. Everybody is impacted in some way, shape, or form. It is not to place blame on the family. It is not to take away blame. It is not to place blame. None of that. And it's also not referring to the genetic component um, that people tend to think that, addiction is a genetic thing and that someone in the family must have an addiction for this person. That's not what I mean. This is totally not even close. Um, which is why I wanted to go into the family dynamics involving addiction because I think it's so important that we just take a look at that. Again, not to blame, but to just acknowledge how everybody is impacting each other in the family. So basically, the person with the addiction, whether they're using, drinking, if it's eating, gambling, I don't care what it is. If you're doing something to get away from something or to cope with something, and then there's tolerance involved, and then like a withdrawal that happens, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, whatever, that's an addiction. Again, my home dude, Gabor Mate. Look him up. He's on YouTube. Other people have talked about this as well, being the main point of addiction. And that's why it's not just substances, because you can have all of those meet that criteria for a lot of different things. So whomever has the addiction in the family is using these things or behaviors, engaging in them to cope or to escape or to numb some bigger problem. So, what are they trying to cope with? It's probably a little deeper than we realize. Not probably, it is. And for a lot of us, it stems from childhood. I'm just gonna be point blank dead honest with you. Like that's just how it is. It's stemming from, even if it's not something that you would think of as being traumatic, it's stemming from something that happened where this person internalized or perceived it a certain way and developed those negative core beliefs that we talked about. I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. I'm a failure. I'm never going to amount to anything. Stuff like that. That stems from childhood, usually. Granted, there are circumstances in which, like, it did not, like, where nothing happened within the family to create that. Maybe something at school, if they were bullied. I don't know. Um, but it started at a young age. They just happened to find whatever addiction as a coping mechanism later on in life that helped, or earlier, depending on the person. Um, and so, but what? Well, what is that? That to me is like, what are they trying to avoid? What are they trying to deal with? What are they trying to cope with? Let's take a look at that. Um, and sometimes it is from childhood trauma. Sometimes it is from, unresolved emotions, resentment, trauma, just unresolved issues from childhood that we're trying to escape. I know for me, that was the case. There's a lot of things that were not resolved. And my solution to decrease stress and anxiety was to use substances, um, or to be in people pleasing relationships, or to eat my way through sweets because sugar makes me feel good. It still does, clearly. Didn't get those cheeks for nothing. But uh I just think it's important that we look at why. Like, what is going on here? Again, this is not to blame. This is just as I look at it as education. I look at it as the why, to me, is a lesson, because it's not about, okay, I know the why. And yes, maybe I have childhood trauma and that is why, like, I'm using, because I'm numbing that and I'm repressing and I don't want to deal with it. So I use to avoid. It's not to, once we know why, to then blame. It's just, okay, so this is why. What do I have to do to move past this in a more healthy, productive way instead of engaging in maladaptive behavior? I apologize. My dog is barking because my wife just came home. But um it's, to me, that's why the why of this is so important. It's not to blame. It's to figure out and connect pieces and make things logical. Because if we understand why we're doing something, like, then you're, I feel like, more likely to stop or to want to fix that. But if you just keep blindly going through and doing the same thing over and over, refusing to look at the why, it's never going to get better. It might temporarily. We put band-aids on things, right? Um, like emotional band-aids, over emotional wounds, I mean, or psychological wounds, but they will never heal fully, um, because they will always be reopened. The Band-Aid will always get triggered and ripped off, um, until we figure out the why, because then you have the power, then you have the tools to move forward and decide to engage in treatment or therapy or support groups or just self-care, whatever it is. But until then, you don't even know what you're fixing if you don't have the why. So I find that to be extremely important. I know for myself, it was very important for me to know the why. It still is. That's why, I love psychology so much and I want to be a therapist and I love to analyze things. It's because, to me, that it's not trivial. It's important. Um, but anyways, I digress. Um, So back to the family dynamic. So again, a lot of the times we come from very, very dysfunctional homes. And again, I'm not going to generalize and say all of us, but most of us, many of us, a lot of us do. Those of us, I mean, with who struggle with addiction, um, any kind of addiction, come from very dysfunctional homes where we experienced or still do toxic familial relationships. Usually, if you look at someone with addiction and look at their family dynamic, you look at their family system, it's extremely toxic, even from childhood for them. It started out that way. And again, this isn't to place blame, this just tends to be a pattern. It's not to say like it's a parent's fault or this and that, but we do play a role. Everybody plays a role. Everyone impacts each other in the family, whether we want to admit that or not. Like, yes, ultimately everyone has a choice to do something, right? Um, but to a certain degree, we're impacted by the other members of our family. Now, and not everyone's family is blood related. Sometimes it's whatever you view as like family. So I'm not like just sticking to blood relatives here. It's whatever you viewed as your family growing up, or even currently. Um, so I really think that once the addiction starts, this is where the family is able to kind of project and deflect their stuff. But before that, they were already having issues relating to one another, or lack thereof, whether it's mothering, like a helicopter mom. Sorry, mom, but it is what it is. You know that that's you. Um, or whether it's someone who is more, I don't even want to say neglectful, but yes, sometimes neglectful towards their kids, or um, just is not capable of giving what a child might need. Um, even going before that, before the child enters the life of the parents, there was probably issues in the relationship, the dynamic of the mother and father. And then the child comes in, and then it's just like a whole hot mess because the parents can then take out their own stuff on the child or the siblings. It's just like and this is subconsciously. I don't know many people who purposely or consciously did things to their kids, and if they did, then there's something pathologically wrong there. Um, so, but likely that's not the case here that I'm talking about. So, um, sometimes it is, but for this, I'm not referring to that type of a parent. So we become the problem, basically. Um, we take the problems from within the family and um, within the parents, parent siblings, sibling doesn't really matter. We take it all on because we, when you become the problem, everything else falls to the side and it's just you. Again, I gave the reference of like the sun and like revolving, right? I'm not saying that, I don't say that to mean like we're the center of the world. I mean that to say that when you're the problem, we're the scapegoat. Like we're able to be blamed for things that aren't even our fault. Um, because it does decrease stress and anxiety, or it makes people feel that way when they can point the finger at somebody else instead of themselves. And it's easier to blame one person versus everyone like pointing fingers. You know what I mean? It's just so. Um, Now, this is not to invalidate feelings because obviously people in the family they're going to have emotions that are valid regarding the family member who is struggling with the addiction, right? So a lot of times there's resentment there. People are upset, they're sad, they're frustrated, they're depressed, they're angry, irritable, resentful, all of the things. And all of those emotions are valid. However, what is not valid is the fact that nobody wants to actually deal with this issue head on. Most of the time, it's they want to blame, they want to not take responsibility for what their part is, not in the person's addiction, but in like the person's inability to feel supported or loved. Um, and that does play a huge role in whether or not somebody might be able to successfully get clean or sober or stop engaging in whatever addictive behavior that they're engaging in. Because when you are going away for treatment and you're being taught all these wonderful things and these coping mechanisms and learning about self, and you go back home into a family that is still extremely toxic and has no ability to even look at what their issues are separately from this person and their addiction. When the person comes back from treatment after they've done all this work on themselves, they get thrown right back into all the other people's shit, and then it just re-triggers them, and re-triggers really those core beliefs, the negative core beliefs, and then they go out and they relapse on whatever addictive behavior it might be. I know for myself that is the case because I can't tell you how many times, countless times, that I've gone to treatment, done work on myself. I'm going to IOP, I'm home, I'm thinking I'm doing all right. Things will go all right for a while, and then it's like right back into that same sick cycle of family dynamic. And it's because I can only do so much work on myself, right? I can't fix the family because guess what? I'm not the problem. We are not the problem. The person with the addiction is really not the problem. Do they have problems? Yes, of course. But does every single person within the family. It just comes out differently for everybody. And like we talked about before, it might come out in ways that are more socially acceptable than using substances or eating disorders or gambling or whatever. So they don't want to address that because they don't think that that's like an issue because they still function and go to work and yada yada yada. We all know that's a bunch of you know what. So it relieves stress just as we relieve stress by or anxiety by using substances, right? The family is relieving their stress and their anxiety by putting blame and not having to look at themselves and what part they play. Um, which kind of almost is an addiction in itself too. Like you're addicted to not taking responsibility for your own shit. Um, so this whole thing, like coming home from treatment again and again and having done work on myself and being re-triggered every time. Um, and it wasn't necessarily them, right? It's not. This is why I say I can't place blame. We can't place blame because it's not my dad, it's not my mom, it's not my sister, it's not them, the people themselves that are triggers for me. It's the way that they perceive things and interpret things and their inability to take responsibility for their stuff, um, and how that inability makes me well, it keeps me stuck in that problem role, right? Um, no matter how well I get. Because if I'm well and I'm not the problem, then guess what? That means that they can't engage in their addictive behavior, which is to avoid looking at themselves. um, so they would end up having to take a look at themselves if I get better. So subconsciously, the family system is trying to grasp for homeostasis, right? What they've known for years. I mean, 30 something years, I've been the problem. So now that I'm getting better, it's like they're grasping at straws. They're trying to do anything to pull me back down almost and keep me in that sick, like problem role. Cause if not, then they have to look at their own shit. And they've not done that this whole time for 30 something years. They've been able to use me as the scapegoat. Um, so they will say things like subconscious, like they don't realize that they're saying certain things that are feeding into my negative core beliefs, that are re-triggering those negative core beliefs after I just did all this work on myself to feel good. Like, okay, you are good enough, you are a good person, you know, you made mistakes but you're learning, you're getting better, you are going to be successful, you're capable. Like these things that I like, because really that's what we're doing in treatment. We're trying to build this up. Remember, I talk about self-efficacy, like helping the client to build this belief that they can do anything, that they're not incapable, that they're not helpless, that they are competent and able. But when you've done that work and you come home and your family's still treating you like you're a piece of shit, and that you're not capable, or worthy, or whatever, um, this is attacking your self-worth. This is just continuing to trigger those negative core beliefs, and it makes your self-worth go backwards. Just did all this work in treatment, right? If you were really actually doing the work in the treatment center or wherever you're at, therapy, it's like undoing everything that you had just done, because our brains are just wired to go to the negative. You can look at it, I'm sure, in your life, examples of this, but I know for myself, if I am given 1,000 compliments about how amazing I am, I'm just giving an example. I don't really think that way, but if I've been given all these compliments, right? And then I get one negative thing, one person's like, you're all right, I guess, you know, it wasn't even that bad of a comment, but even no matter how many people, God himself could come down and be like, you are amazing, I love you, like you got this. And that one little comment, that's what I focus on. I don't focus on the 1,000 positives. I focus on the one negative. And our brains are just wired to do that for some reason as humans. So this is why people relapse. This is why I relapse, at least. Again, I'm gonna keep it on the I, because I can't speak completely for other people, even though that's like a theme that I've seen in this field. So 30 something years of using and being the fuck up and being the problem. And I go away for 30 days or however long, 60 days, 90 days even. And I've done this work on my self-worth, my self-esteem, self-efficacy, all of that good stuff, right? I'm starting to feel better about myself. I come home, one little comment, boom, done, back to where I was. See, you are a piece of shit. See, you aren't capable. That was all bullshit, what you just did. This is your reality. This is the truth. Um, so 30 days in treatment, honestly, and after having 30 years of maladaptive behavior, negative core beliefs that were so ingrained, when families expect you to come home and be perfect and be fixed and get your life together like that week, um, not only is it unrealistic of them, but then it's triggering those negative core beliefs again, and then the cycle starts all over. At least for myself. Again, I can't speak for everybody, but I know for myself, it was just like they still don't trust me. They still don't believe I'm capable. They still don't see, you are a piece of shit. And then it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, okay, well, I'm going to show them. You want to see a piece of shit? I'll show you one. And then it's like, boom, I'm off and running. So, and then they're like, why? Why does this always happen? La, 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 la. Well, it's because, they can't, it's because, they can't really I don't know, I guess take responsibility and be encouraging. And I think that that stems from fear, which is valid. But it's when we don't look at when everyone in the family system doesn't look at their part in it, it's detrimental to the person with the addiction because they're just deflecting and projecting and putting their own shit and their own feelings about themselves onto you, or me, rather. I'm talking about myself. So we need to be, we need to understand that the addiction is a concrete issue, okay? So, the way the family system was operating prior to the addiction starting, um, there were issues within that family in the interpersonal relationships, um, within the family members, and, there were things probably like, we all have spoken and well, even more so, unspoken rules within families that are sometimes really rigid, sometimes they're more loose. Um, I know a lot of it in my family is you don't talk about things. You have something going on, don't talk about it. If you have feelings, don't talk about it unless it's like happy. Um, we don't want to hear about the sad and depressed. And if there's issues, sweep it under the rug. Don't let anyone outside of it. Like those aren't spoken rules. I've talked about this, I think, in the beginning of the podcast when I first started this. But they exist because I picked them up from watching how my parents interacted and then how my parents interacted with me and with my sister. Um, so there's these unhealthy communications happening prior to the addiction starting. But once the addiction starts, it's kind of like the family is able to put something, put their problems on something that is tangible, something that's concrete, right? They can blame it on a problem that is more concrete. Whereas if it's just everyone like kind of pointing and all over the place, then it's like, I don't know. It's not the same as having like one person to be able to pin all your shit onto, if that makes sense. Um, I don't know if any of this makes sense, but that's like just how I think of it. Um, so no one is responsible for the person developing the addiction. I don't believe that. I don't believe that anyone is to blame, not even the person with the addiction, because even though they made the choice to pick up and use a substance or to gamble or to engage in eating disorder behavior, whatever, there's a reason behind it. And it started off as just a way to deal, as a way to cope. And it just happened to turn into something maladaptive and life threatening and life ruining. But that was never the intention in the beginning. No one ever starts off like, yeah, I'm going to do this and fuck my whole life up. Excuse my French, but it's true. No one does that. So, not anyone I've met, anyways. Um, so, no one is responsible for causing the addiction, even if there's abuse, even if there's trauma. No one is responsible. But the way families work as a system, everything's interconnected. Um, so interactions do impact the person with the addiction because everyone's interactions impact each other, whether you have an addiction or not. So now imagine having the addiction on top of how your family can make you feel at times. It's like we all have dysfunction. Families have dysfunction throughout it. Some just have, I think, a little bit more than others. And a lot of us tend to come like a lot of people with addiction tend to come from those families that have a little bit of more dysfunction than others. Not always, but a lot of the time. So what are the roles? So there's the enabler, right? This can be a spouse, parent. It can be really anybody. I'm not even gonna typecast somebody um, into that role. Um, but the enabler is someone who's trying to protect the addict or someone with addiction, um, from consequences. They're trying to keep the peace. They're trying to cover up the person's like actions. Um, a lot of times there's a lot of guilt on their part and shame, even depending on the things that they do, the lengths that they go to protect this person. Um, and they feel guilty for the addiction. They blame themselves a lot of the times. They, I guess you could say, are doing the wrong things for the right reasons, because the things that they're doing are completely valid ways to try to avoid, you know, or to help this person. Their intention is good, but they're things that can actually cause more harm to the person suffering from the addiction. Um, and basically, they're trying to keep homeostasis. They're trying to keep the family on course. I know for me, it's my mom. My mom is definitely the enabler. Like, I think she would even tell you that. She knows that about herself. And that's not uncommon. That tends to, be the case with a lot of families. It's the mother or the father that fall into that role. Um, Now, the next person would be the hero. This is either like a sibling or could even be a parent. Um, but this person is often like really responsible, highly successful, highly ambitious, probably a perfectionist, uh, and they bring stability and praise to the family, while the, you know, addicted person is, um, struggling. Um, the hero looks, and seems to be like they have their shit together, right, on the outside, but a lot of times, um, if they were to be honest and vulnerable with you, they would probably tell you that they're in a lot of pain. They're hiding a lot of pain. And this perfectionism and overachieving and all of that is just a way for them to try and relieve stress and pain, um, and to feel a little in control, because I'm sure it must feel helpless to watch someone else going through that pain, and watching your family go through pain, and then watching whoever's the enabler do their thing and enable, and seeing that how that's harming the person with the addiction and the family, because sometimes the enabler will kind of do things behind the family's back or secretively or whatever it is to try to help the person with the addiction. So that can create problems too. Now there's the lost child, which a lot of people think this is the middle child syndrome thing, which some middle children do experience this. Like, they do fall into the lost child role. But this is just talking about, the person in the family who just tries to blend in. They don't want to cause any more waves. They don't want to make any more waves. They don't want to cause any more problems. So it's like, I'll just be quiet and be ignored. My feelings aren't important. Everyone else's is. Probably a people pleaser. A lot of the lost children are people pleasers. And um, extremely independent because, they don't want to bother anyone. They don't want to burden anybody with any more things going on in the family because of everything that's already going on. They're usually withdrawn and isolated, and a lot of times they cope by avoiding the family altogether. So, I don't really have anyone in my family that would fall into that. To give an example of, my sister's the hero for sure. If you're watching, you know this about yourself. She definitely took on, like, I'm the older sibling, she's the younger one, but everyone thinks she's older. She took on the older sibling role. I kind of stepped down into like the younger sibling role. Um, and she definitely fits 150% into this hero spot. Um, and again, while I'm going over these, I'm not saying one's bad and one's good. I hate using that. I catch myself. So I try not to refer to things as bad or good necessarily. It's just that it's unhealthy, healthy more of. Um, so it's not bad to be the hero. It's not bad to be the enabler. It is what it is. That's just what role you fall into. depending on your actions. And it's important to know, because then that's important to educate yourself on why you're doing those things and how to improve yourself so that you're not impacting the person with the addiction in a negative way. Um, then there's the clown, aka the mascot. So this is the person who's always cracking jokes, always laughing, can't take anything seriously. Usually they're not taken seriously, and that probably carries through their lifetime because they fell into that role of being the clown. Um, they're basically the comic relief for the family. They're trying to avoid the family from feeling more pain, discomfort, stress, whatever. So they relieve that, or try to relieve it, um, with humor. Um, I would say that maybe even sometimes I fall into that role with certain things now. But yeah, so I'm sure that a lot of you guys might fall into that role, or you might know somebody within your family dynamic that falls into this role, but they are a big part, because it's just another way to take the focus. They're trying to help the family like heal. They're trying to help the family like not be hurt, and that's the only way they know how. But again, underneath a lot of the people who fall into this role is a lot of pain and stress themselves. So, and then lastly, but not least, is the scapegoat. I think sometimes the scapegoat can be separate, but the scapegoat can also be combined with being the problem, because I would say that I was the scapegoat. I still am to a certain degree. Um, so was a scapegoat and the problem together. So, I think it's possible for one person to fall into both of these categories. I'm also, um, kind of, I guess, I don't know. I think that there's people within the family that could be multiple people that could be the scapegoat. So basically, it's like a if you can't beat them, join them thought process for the scapegoat. Not for everybody, but uh, that's just how I think of it. Um, Sometimes it's the teenager in the family, the teenager of an addict, even like the teenager of a parent who struggles with addiction. You might see this where they're like truant from school, or getting into trouble, bullying, or being bullied. Sometimes, maybe even. They might also be using substances. They act out basically to draw attention, but it's typically negative attention and not positive attention. But it's almost like a subconscious, or sometimes maybe even a conscious cry for help, for there to be focus on the family in some way, shape, or form. Um, so again, there's a lot of pain coming from this person and their behaviors. They act out in order to deal with that. Now, this usually the roles that you fall into, they stay pretty like uh, consistent throughout. Granted, things could change and shift. That's why it's called family dynamics, right? Because it's not family fixed. There's nothing that's fixed. It's always changing and moving and evolving. But typically, this is like the patterns that we see in those family roles that people fall into with somebody, well, just period in family dynamics, but especially with people who have a family member that is an addict. Um, Now, how do we break the pattern, the maladaptive pattern of communication, rather, or lack thereof? Because maybe there is no communication, and that's the problem is that there's just no communication at all, and it's uh, interfering with anybody getting better, or the communication is just really, really toxic. So what do we do? And I think, this is my opinion, Again, everything I say is opinion based. Yes, some of it, I am researching and looking up stuff, or I know things from school or whatever that are factual, but this is opinion. Um, Everyone's responsible for themselves. We are not responsible for someone else. That saying, like, we all do it when you're like upset or something, and you're like, oh, well, you made me feel. That's no, no one can make you feel anything. I think that you can have feelings associated with something someone said or did, but they can't make you feel anything. They are not responsible for your thoughts or your actions. We are responsible for ourselves. We might not be responsible for thoughts or actions, or excuse me, we might not be responsible for our thoughts, right? Because those just kind of come. But we are in charge of what we do with those thoughts. Do we keep feeding into them? Uh, or do we challenge them and try to create better, positive uh, thoughts? Um, More realistic, more rational thoughts. We can't control our emotions. The emotions that are evoked, provoked, whatever, um, from an interaction with somebody, you can't help that that's how you feel. You just do, and they're valid. They're called your feelings because they're your feelings. Nobody can take those away from you. Otherwise, they'd be called their feelings, when referring to how you feel. But no, we say like they're my feelings. Um, and so we don't have control over the feelings that come up, but we are in control of how we act on those emotions, or whether we internalize something instead of expressing it, or just are we coping maladaptively or healthy, in healthy ways. Um, so we're responsible for ourselves. We have to look at our own parts and get individual help. We are not we are not I wish it was as simple as, if you get better, I'm gonna get better. Um, because if that was the case, my whole family would be so much healthier. Our interactions would be better. Um, Other relationships in my life would be better. Um, so I'm not responsible for them. They're not responsible for me. But I'm responsible for taking care of my part. In the 12 steps, they always say, keep the side of your street cleaned. So I can only focus on my lane, staying in my lane, taking care of myself. And in turn, doing that, I will communicate better. I will communicate better. I will. Um, and hopefully by leading through example, people might change, or realize that they need to get help too. Now, whether they do or not, I'm not responsible for that either. Um, However, in addiction, they try to include the families in on treatment so much because it is a family disease, because the problem stemmed from something deeper than the addiction. Like the family was probably already having issues prior to that. And then this just exacerbated it and brought things out to the open more and highlighted things. Um, and guess what? When the problem gets better, the dynamic is still going to stay the same unless every person in the family recognizes their part and takes care of that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do family therapy, or work together as a system, as a whole, because I think that you can also work on yourself through family therapy. Like when you're in family therapy, yes, you're worried about the system, you're worried about the whole, the unit, but in doing so, it's forcing you to look at your part within that system, within that unit. It's not to sit there and point the finger. It's to, okay, what am I doing to contribute to either this healthy or unhealthy communication or situation, interaction, whatever. So you can better yourself through the family therapy as well. But I just think it's important, through my own experiences, and just through my opinion, that you need individual help while also doing the family therapy. Um, to me, family therapy isn't for talking about certain deep, deep issues that like a parent has with their kids there. Even if they're adult children, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to know your traumatic shit that happened to you when you were 5 years old, unless I wanna know, which I don't really wanna know, um, because it's just that is putting me in a position to know too much, like, um, some people maybe wanna know, I don't know. I don't. I have enough of my own shit, but I can empathize and know that you've had trauma or something, but, like, that's where I think the parent or the sibling or whatever needs their own privacy to, like, talk about certain things in their own individual sessions, um, but the family therapy is to work on, like, the unit and how to help the unit communicate better and interact better so that in turn, individually, they can react and respond better, um, by themselves and within the unit, if that makes sense. I don't know if any of that even made sense just now, but, um, basically, if you're doing your part, you're contributing to a healthier family system. That's just how I feel. Um, and again, you can't change anyone else. So even if you are doing the work on yourself and your family still continues to think you're the problem, they still keep trying to shove you into this scapegoat role, um, or the problem role, whatever. Um, we can't change anyone else. We can only change ourselves. And if they're not changing with you, that's fine. That's their own shit. And they're really losing out on an amazing relationship with their family member, whether it's their kid, their parent, their sibling, cousin, I don't know, whatever it might be. Um, and that's their loss. But it sucks. It hurts. It really, you think as the problem, I'm gonna get better. And all of my relationships are gonna improve because I'm better. And for me, at least, it's not the case. Some situations, I know friends who it has gotten better because they've gotten better. Their families did have dysfunction, but their families were capable of really taking a look at themselves and fixing themselves as well. Um, but not every family, member has that ability. Um, they're not there. They might never get there, and that's fine. So that's where I've learned in recovery to find other people who can represent my family for me, whether that's people within my wife's family, whether that's friends, um, coworkers, whatever. Again, family doesn't have to be blood. Um, and you kind of have to learn and accept, I did anyways, that sometimes people aren't going to be able to give you what you need. And that's all right. It really does. Some days are better than others. It hurts more on other days than others, but it's not a reflection of myself. And I know that. Today, I know that. My whole life, I did not know that. I did take on that and blame myself and think that it was because I was the problem. But now, having done a lot of work on myself and continuing my journey of self healing, I know that I'm not responsible for anybody else. And that's their shit. And it's sad for them. So, um, I'm saying this on a day that I'm feeling pretty good about myself. There are other days where I'm just like, you know, filled with much more anger and resentment. I think that's just with anything, it fluctuates. But I don't have to go out and get fucking high today over it. I don't have to actually, you know, um, fuck my life up because of someone else's fuck up or issues. I can still take care of myself and do what I have to do. So, again, I don't want to go too much deeper into that. I hope this made sense. And I just want to say thank you to all my listeners, to my viewers. Not, I mean, not that I don't want this podcast to blow up, because I do, because I want to help as many people as I can, but it's really just a self-care thing for me. It started out as that anyways, so and if I can just help one person, then I'm doing my job to give back. So again, thanks for tuning in, and you can always reach me. My website's www.whatsyourstuff.com, and this podcast you can listen to on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, on my Anchor website where I host this podcast on. Um, and then here on YouTube. Check me out. If you are getting some stuff from it, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram and on Facebook, on TikTok at Everybody Has Stuff. And pass this along if you know of anybody that might benefit from this. I would really greatly appreciate it, because I just want to help people. If there's topics or different things you guys want to hear about, or you would like to come on the show to share your experiences and hope, or opinions, whatever, or your knowledge, please reach out. And if you are struggling, um, please, you can reach out to me. I can always give resources. I, have people in the field that I can reach out to if need be, if you need resources to different treatments or help. And also, if this is an emergency of any type, please always call 911. Uh, don't sit around and wait. You can call SAMHSA, their hotline. It's 1-800-487-4889. That's for anybody who is suffering from addiction or a family member who's concerned. And then there's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-27, I can't even read my writing, 273-8255. Okay. So please reach out if you need help. I'm here. Other people are there for you guys. Much love. And until next time. Peace.